Hi everyone, Byron White here. Pleasure to be with you all today. I'm here with James Taylor. James, welcome.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here, Byron.
We are super excited to run through this presentation with you and give our creativity a jolt and learn some hacks for betterment. So we're excited about that. Let me go through a couple of logistics just real fast, and that is following. This webinar is being recorded. I guarantee somebody will ask that question in about 10 minutes from now that comes in late. They'll send up a chat, which I encourage all of you to do. Post your questions. I'll be monitoring them throughout the presentation. We'll circle back with James at the end of the presentation to fire questions off to him. So please, please, please ask questions throughout the presentation, and we can even reverse back to any slides that you might see that were inspiring or that you wanted to look at again or had a question about. So good news there. We'll be sending a link to the recording out as well, so you'll all have access to it. And that includes anyone that's registered that couldn't make it. Although there will be some bonus prizes, I'm sure, that we'll offer throughout the presentation if you stay with it. More on that later. Let's see. Please show us some Twitter love. That helps us justify the hard work we put in, particularly Kelly. Shout out to her for putting together the organization for all these webinars and email blasts and all the fun things and organizing the guests and all that great stuff. Kelly's awesome. She helps me in so many ways. It's insane, but more importantly, she's a great force in marketing and helps with social media and all kinds of cool stuff. So shout out to Kelly. You guys all know me, so let's move right along. If you don't, a little selfish plug for a content marketing conference coming up in April. I spoke with James about potentially speaking there, and unfortunately he had a conflict, but turned us on to some interesting people. So shout out to CMC and good stuff there. Let's see, the famous James Taylor. It would take me 20 minutes to read his background to you and all the illustrious things he's doing that are making life amazing for so many people. He's a creative genius. He's worked with rock stars. He's launching 20 online schools. He can talk creativity with the royalty and with billionaires. He's probably going to become a knight pretty soon. I'm not sure. I kind of made that up. But we're super excited to learn about him and his background. And I will probably have some questions for him about his background at the end of the presentation, because he's certainly well connected with some very interesting people, including Bob Dylan and Nelson Mandela and other people that have done remarkable things in the world. So we're looking forward to hearing all about that and a lot more. So without further ado, here's how you can get a hold of me, but I'm going to turn things over. I'm going to change the presenter, and off we go in a matter of milliseconds here. Click a button, da-da, off to you, James. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I'll look forward to your questions, and we'll chat after.
Well, that's wonderful, and hopefully I can live up to that incredible introduction that you've just given to me, Byron, as well. That's a pretty amazing introduction, so thank you very much for that. I don't know, where's everyone joining us from in the world today? Maybe, Byron, towards the end of this we can find out where everyone is, and hopefully you can see my my slide that's up here just now as well. If you wonder this strange accent, if you've come onto this webinar today thinking that it's going to be the singer-songwriter James Taylor that's going to be talking to you about creativity, unfortunately it's not. It's me. I'm the other James here. There's two of us. So we're going to have some fun on this session today, and we're going to be covering creativity hacking, which is a relatively new term that's entered the lexicon in recent years. And I think it's really applicable to everyone that's listening just now, because you're all marketers and obviously content marketers as well. And kind of creativity is the kind of key thing. It's kind of where everything begins for you. So I'm really excited to start sharing some of these slides with you today. So if you don't know me, Byron gave me a very nice introduction. I'll give you a very quick one. So I'm a speaker, a creativity coach, and also the founder of something called C School, which is a school for online school for creative thinking. And Byron, maybe you can just let me know if everyone was able to see this slide. Okay?
Yeah, we're having some. It's a little funky right now. Your screen might be frozen, or try moving something, or try. You might have to tap on your actual PowerPoint presentation and then move the slides. There you go. Okay, we're back in business.
Okay. That's great. Good. So
good.
yeah. So So just want to make sure everyone can see that. So we're going to be talking about creativity specifically in this, but around creativity hacking. So let's get started. I'll take you through what we're going to cover. So we're going to look at different ways to unlock your creative potential and tap into your creative genius. And that phrase, creative genius, I'm going to take a little bit umbrage at it and just talk to you about why I believe that you should be considering yourself a creative genius. So that may sound a little bit strange. If you don't consider yourself a creative genius now, don't worry, I'll explain all in a minute. We're also going to show you how to design a creative process that actually works with inspiration on demand. So especially if you're working in a creative agency, you're constantly having to create on demand all the time. There's an expression which is inspiration is for amateurs. So as creatives, we have to have a toolkit to be able to call up inspiration on demand, and we'll cover some things in that and how to do that. And that's really what these creativity hacks are all about. So I'm going to show you how everything really from the color that you have around you to caffeine affects your levels of creativity. And we're also going to look at how to give creative feedback to your team to get the best results. So I recognize probably a lot of people on the call, you may be individual creative professionals working on your own, but probably most people here that are going to be on the call on this webinar today, you're going to be working as part of a team. So it's important to understand how creativity works in a team context and an organizational context as well. Okay, so quick bit of history. And you'll probably understand this as marketers, but I gave a similar presentation to this the other day to a group of lawyers and judges in the United Kingdom. And they were kind of fascinated by how marketing has evolved. But you as skilled marketers listening to this now, you will recognize these things. But in terms of where we've come to with creativity, in the 50s and 60s, we were in what was called the age of efficiency. So in the home, it was all about getting that time-saving appliance. And as marketers, what we were doing primarily is we were selling convenience and affordable luxury. In the office, you would have these computers that would take up entire floors in buildings, which now fit in your pocket. But it was really about that age of efficiency in the 50s and 60s. Then what happened is we moved into the 70s and 80s, which became the age of quality. So that's when things like Japanese total quality management, Kaizen, started coming up as well, especially in manufacturing, less so in marketing, but definitely in manufacturing. So here, as marketers, the values that we were trying to talk about a lot were around consistency and around quality. And so that a lot of our messaging wanted to imbue those values in there. And then in the 90s and early 2000s, we entered what we call the age of flexibility. So you'll recognize this. If you came into the workplace in the 90s and early 2000s, you'll recognize a lot of this stuff, cross-functional teams, dotted line reporting, synergies, corporate outsourcing. These things have gradually evolved into things like agile teams and Scrum. These are probably methodologies you may use in your own business. But as marketers, we began to focus a lot more on lifestyle marketing. And also, we have a greater level of complexity in marketing that marketers before never really had to deal with. So this requires a greater level of creativity. Now, this week, what's happening in Davos, which is in Switzerland, the World Economic Forum is going on. So last year at the World Economic Forum, they came out with this study, and which I think was very, very powerful. And it basically said, what are the top skills going to be by 2020? And what they discovered was that creativity is moved from number 10 to number 3. It's now it's going to be the third most important skill that you can have in the jobs market. And just to let you kind of put that in context, creativity is going to be more important than negotiation skills, emotional intelligence, things that a lot of people have written books about and there's courses about all the time. But in terms of creativity, it's going to be up there now. A friend of mine I was talking to, he works with Boston Consulting Group, and they asked 2,500 executives, where creativity is in their priorities, their strategic priorities. And they put creativity as the third most important strategic priority for their companies. So we're at this time in history where we need to focus on that most human of resources that we have, our natural ability to create and to innovate. Many if you've got kids, many kids in school today will do jobs that haven't even been invented yet and that will demand greater creative skills. You know, in my business alone, we employ a full-time Facebook ads manager. So that was a job that didn't even exist maybe 5 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago. So as marketers, and especially as content marketers, this rise of creativity as a skill is actually in a sweet spot. But there's a danger here, because alongside this rise of creativity, you also have globalization going on, and I'm going to show you why that's important for you. Now, my talk today is going to be in 3 acts. I'm into like theater and plays and things like that, so I'm going to break it down into 3 acts for you. So in this Act 1, we're going to cover, it's going to be quite short, we're going to look in terms of about creative potential. What is creative potential? We're also going to look at a little bit of history again about, as marketers and content marketers, what the early Greeks and Romans can teach us about creativity and creative genius. Then we'll move into Act 2, and I'm going to show you how the creative process actually works, 5 steps or stages of the creative process. And this is where we can come into a lot of the kind of creativity hacking stuff. So I'm going to show you about how things like color and caffeine and warm baths, how all these things affect your levels of creativity. Also in Act 2, we'll cover giving creative feedback to your team. And then finally, we'll end off in Act 3, and I'll show you just how to take advantage of some of the opportunities that are happening within digital creativity specifically. So, Act 1, why we are all creative. So let me first of all define what I mean by creative and creativity, because there's lots of different definitions that float around. So the definition that we're going to use for this, it may not necessarily be your definition, but it's the definition that we'll use in this presentation, is the ability to produce things which are new, novel, and useful. So there's a couple of these key words here, which is new, novel, and useful. These are the important words to remember when thinking about creativity. Now, in creativity research, a lot of stuff, I spend a lot of my time kind of looking into the research, what's going on in the neuroscience of creativity as well. There's often argued that there's actually 2 types of creatives. There's what we call small c creatives, and these are, they do things which are new and novel, but they don't change the domain or the field in which they're operating. And big C creatives, on the other hand, do things which are new and novel, and they change the industry, the domain or the field in which they're working in. So let me give you an example of this just now. So I'm a big fan of Anchorman, the TV show, the movie. So in that, we had the fictional character Ron Burgundy of Anchorman, and he is what we describe as a big C creative, because if you've ever watched the movie, you'll know that he changed 24-hour broadcast news. What did he do? He changed things because it was new, it was novel, it was useful, and it changed the domain. Now, on the other hand, my cat, this is Parker, he is what we call a small C creative. I gave him lots of other names, but I'm going to give him the title of small C creative just now. Because while he's always devising new ways to catch small rodents when he's, when he's out and about, he is not, or is unlikely to change the pest control industry. He's unlikely to change the domain. So what he's doing is new, it's sometimes novel, but it doesn't change the domain. So if we think about marketing, then you could argue that someone like Seth Godin is a big C creative, because he comes up with things which are new and novel, and definitely useful, around permission marketing and things, but and he's also changed the domain. Now, what all the creative academics and researchers do agree on, however, is that we are all creative to different degrees. So it doesn't matter, it's a kind of sliding scale really between the small C creatives and big C creatives, but we all have this in the human nature of being creative. Now, I'm going to put up some polls here because I'd like to get a little bit of interaction with everyone. So the first question I'd like to ask you, and Byron and Kelly, if you're able to kind of show this up, that would be awesome, is I'd like to ask how many people believe that creativity is essential for the work that they do? So let me just see if you can see this. Oh, my screen's just suddenly gone blank. So
that's me running the poll, just so you know.
Oh, that's great. So how many people believe that that creativity is essential for the work they do? Regardless, whatever kind of work you do you consider that creativity is essential for that? And it's a yes, no answer for that. So
wonderfully active poll crowd. 80% of the people have casted their vote, and the voting, we're even reaching above that. 99% say yes. I will now close the poll.
Awesome. So my next question here is, and this kind of leads on from this, is if I can just find my screen again. So how many people they're in on this webinar just now would describe themselves as creative? Do you identify as being creative? And that's a yes, no. Do you consider yourself creative or don't you? So just answer that quick poll just now as well. I'll just give you a couple of seconds to do that.
The results are trickling in.
Oh, it's getting exciting now.
Very exciting. 87% say, what do you think? What is your guess as to what 87% say? James?
Well, I think this is a very smart crowd we're speaking to today. So my guess is that the majority are saying that they are creative.
That is correct. And the final question that you want to poll people?
So the final question here as well is, how many people here work for organizations that actively invest in creativity training? So they run some kind of training which works around creativity and innovation. So just a yes, no. If your organization, if you're a sole trader, if you're an independent, do you invest in your own creativity training?
Well, I think we're going to all know what some of the answers might be here. What's your guess here, having polled so many people? Let's see if our audience is up to poll. Would you say a majority? Would you say a split? Would you say, what's your guess, James?
Yeah, so my guess is, maybe 50-50. It depends, because wherever I'm speaking in different parts, I speak all over the world. Wherever I'm speaking,
mostly U.S.-based here, by the way. You did get some answers to that question you asked earlier. Mostly U.S.-based.
Yeah. So my guess is that the U.S., you're better at training things, but even then, might be 40% that do some kind of creativity training.
32% yes, 68% no.
Wow, there you go. Interesting, interesting. So let me, on the back of that, if I just kind of head back over to my slides here just now.
By the way, we're going to need to extend this apparently for another half hour, so we will do that. with all those negative responses that came in.
So we'll give some additional bonus training at the end of this, everyone.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So the thing is, this is the fascinating thing about this, is that Adobe did some research a couple of years ago. And what it found is that there's this huge creativity gap. So only 1 in 4 people believe they're living up to their creative potential. Now, this was a global survey that they ran, and they found that only 39% of global respondents described themselves as creative. In the United States, it was 52%. I think here I'm speaking today from the UK. In the UK, it was 45%, I seem to remember. So we have 87% of people on this webinar just now who consider themselves creative, which is great, is fantastic. So I'm preaching to the converted here to some extent. However, I want to, probably there's people in your organization, especially if you work in larger companies, who might not necessarily consider themselves creative, and we have to kind of, I have to take a little bit of that's a core, that's something that we have to deal with, because if we look at those top job skills, the World Economic Forum said, they said creativity is number 3. Well, if only a percentage of people in your organization consider themselves creative, that's going to be a challenge for you. You see, what I do most of the time is I help companies and institutions and experts create online courses. That's what I do a lot of my time, everything from yoga to business to music to medicine, even safety. I'm involved something just now with some of the NFL stadiums. They have safety training for their security as well. Now, one of my businesses also organizes creative retreats in very nice places in the world, like Napa Valley and Amalfi Coast in Italy, and this is actually one we ran, and I just found out today before we came on that Kelly is actually from the part of the States where we held this particular one. This is a guitar retreat we held, and it's up by Woodstock, up in New York State as well. Really fantastic guitar retreat that we ran. What was fascinating to me as I go and speak at these about creativity is how many people are coming back to rediscovering their creativity at a point in their lives, which is maybe they've hit a big birthday, usually a birthday with a 0 on the end, or they've had a loss, or there's been an illness in their family, and suddenly they want to write that book, to pick up that paintbrush, to start that new business again. They get that creative bug, and really what's kind of going on is they're wanting to start reclaiming that creative birthright. That may be the case if you're watching and listening to this just now. Maybe you kind of came back, you found this passion that you have around marketing, you came back to it later, and you're wanting to use that creativity within the job that you do. And so why does it take people so long often to rediscover this thing, which I believe is there and is inherent in all of us, this creativity? Well, Picasso said that every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once he grows up. And if you've ever spent any time with a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, when they're sitting playing with crayons, they're sitting on the floor and they're playing with crayons and they're sitting drawing there, you will see that they're completely immersed in creating. They're what psychologists would call, they're in a flow state. They're having that. And maybe when you're doing work, and you probably know this as a creative yourself, you know the times when you're doing certain types of work where you experience that same flow state and that heightened level of creativity. But what happens is when they're young, they're in that pre-conventional stage. And if you're a parent, you probably have a painting like this up on your fridge, your refrigerator just now. So the painting and the drawing that they do as kids is very abstract. But then what happens is they go to school and their crayons are taken away from them often, and they experience what is called the 4th grade slump. So the 4th grade slump is where they actually see creativity decline in children. Now, what happens here is their art also becomes more representational. So they start to draw they draw objects more, and their speech becomes more literal than metaphoric. What's going on there is the education system is teaching them to become conventional, which is normal. It's part of growing up. We have to learn conventions. In addition to that, they'll have their peer group around them, and if you have teenagers, you'll definitely recognize this, who are also applying pressure on them to be conventional as well. But what they need to do, and this is part of becoming an adult and becoming living a fully creative life, is they need to enter a 3rd stage of becoming what we call post-conventional. So that is where they see conventions as useful signposts, but they're willing to think for themselves and challenge those conventions. So there's nothing wrong with going into that conventional stage when the kids are in school, but you need to come out of it as an adult. A lot of people don't come out of it until they reach much further in life. So perhaps what we're seeing, we're seeing at those creative retreats that we run, or we're seeing with people that's getting that business started again that they had the idea for, or picking up that and starting to write that book again. What we're seeing is with these adults is in their life is they're saying, I want my crayons back. I want that thing that makes me, that gives me that spark. A friend of mine, Hugh MacLeod, the cartoonist, he came up with this expression, I want my crayons back, almost like a mantra for people. So they start that new creative business. They begin writing that novel. They pick up that guitar or that camera. And this is the point I want to get to. You see, it's impossible to be original if you are conforming. And originality is necessary, though not sufficient, to live a fully creative life. So I'll just repeat that. It's impossible to be original if you are conforming, and originality is necessary, though not sufficient, to live a fully creative life. So one of the things, going back to what we talked about creativity, this idea of new and novel and useful changes of domain, in order to create some of those big changes and move from being a small C creative to being a big C creative, you have to not conform. You have to break things. You have to learn the rules, and then you have to be able to break them and create entirely new things that didn't exist before. Now, another one of the things that holds a lot of people back from being creative, so we have 87% of people on this webinar just now who consider themselves creative, which means there's 13% of people on this webinar just now with us all who do not consider themselves creative. So my task just now is I want to kind of get you over the line. I want you to consider yourself as creative. So one of the things that holds people back from identifying as themselves as creative, and maybe you have team members in your organization like this, is that they think that folks that work in the creative industries are they think they're this otherworldly type. They're risk-taking, drug-taking, lone genius, bent on self-destruction, who spend their entire days having blue sky thoughts. They live what we call the creative genius myth. And the thing is, it's a myth, and it's a dangerous one at that, and I'm going to show you why. You see, there's a difference between being a creative genius and having creative genius. These are different things. A little bit of history again. The ancient Greeks and the Romans believed that genius, the creative genius, flowed through us, and we were vessels for ideas and inspiration. So these creative ideas, they could come from a god, the divine, the energy, the people around us, the culture in which we were in, or even a collective consciousness. In fact, if you go back to the origins of the word genius, then you actually find that even cities and towns and places can be imbued with their own genius. But fundamentally, we were vessels for ideas and inspiration. But then what happened is, in the Renaissance, a gentleman called Giorgio Vasari wrote this book. It's called Lives of the Artist. And it developed a really different narrative where the individual was the genius. So Vasari's concept of creative genius made it all about the I, the ego. And in painting this picture of this lone genius, he wrote out the contributions of all the assistants and apprentices who helped him creating some of the world's greatest works of art. Now, if we think about where we are today, this puts a lot of pressure on us as creatives, because before you couldn't take all the credit, which is the downside, because if something worked out of a creative project you were working on, if it did really well, you can take all the credit because you were a vessel for these ideas and these things to flow through. But with Giorgio Vasari's concept of the individual being a creative genius, then if it didn't work out, you had to take the full responsibility for that. And if you've worked in any size of creative organization, you will probably recognize that creativity is a lot more, and innovation is a lot more complex than just the ideas in one person's mind. So Vasari's concept of someone being a creative genius that made a lot of people suddenly feel that both success and failure of their creative project was all on them. Today, we would consider someone like Giorgio Vasari as a spin doctor, carefully sculpting the image of his high-profile clients. Just pick up any magazine or go on any website today. If it's Facebook, it'll be Mark Zuckerberg's face. It's the idea of this genius that's there. But what it does is it also paints out all the people and all the engineers and all the talented creatives that work in that organization to make that company what it is. So one of the things I want to do is just to have you reassess this idea about what creative genius is. And maybe for you, what's going to be more applicable is to look at the origins of where that phrase comes from. So the first 10 years of my life, as Byron was mentioning earlier, I was a kind of modern day Vasari. So I was an artist manager and marketer, and my job was to persuade others that this creative genius myth existed, and the artists I represented were these creative geniuses. And I had the good fortune of working with everyone like Jeff Beck and bands like Deacon Blue and members of the Rolling Stones, multiple Grammy Award winners. Now, here's the thing, and this is why for that 13% on this webinar just now, why I think you should reassess the idea that you are not you are not creative. Because in every single one of these individuals in these groups that I worked with, they all had fears. They all had this creative fears. They had things around their confidence that they were continually working on. So let me know if you're watching this just now, if you feel strongly about if you've ever said any of these phrases to yourself. If you've ever said, my ideas aren't good enough. My ideas aren't new or novel enough. They have to be brand new, for example. My ideas will be rejected. Someone's already done it before, but they've done it better. I fear I'm too young to start. Maybe it's a new creative business idea you've got, or I fear I'm too old to start. I'll publish it only when it's 100% perfect. I coach a lot of female entrepreneurs, and this perfectionism myth, this perfectionism thing is very strong in that grouping. And as the writer Elizabeth Gilbert, she says that perfectionism is a high-class type of fear. It's fear in designer clothes. It's fear in Jimmy Choo shoes. It's pretending to be elegant when in fact is actually terrified. So really, perfectionism is really just fear in different clothes. Now, the creative genius myth that puts so many people off calling themselves creative is a myth. Everyone I've literally stood at the side of some of the biggest stages in the world with artists who people would consider as that lone creative genius, and they've turned to me and they've said, James, I don't know whether I can do this. I don't know whether I can go up there. I feel such a fraud. They have the imposter syndrome that you sometimes hear of as well. So if you're sitting there just now and you don't consider yourself creative because you feel that you have to have it completely together, then I'm here to tell you you can relax. Creativity is inherent in what you do. It's about improving your skills. That brings me to Act 2. So I don't know if Byron said, but my background is I from the UK, but then I moved to America and worked in Silicon Valley. And I discovered that a lot of other startups were working on how to bring together technology and creativity to disrupt industries. So everything from education, which is the area that I was involved in and learning, to transportation, with things like Uber. At that point, Stanford University had just launched one of its first online courses, which saw 160,000 people sign up for a course on the niche area of artificial intelligence. Now, why is this important to you as a marketer? Why should you be paying attention now? And what does this relate to creativity? Well, the big opportunity that we're all looking at is this, and it's described here. I think it was Peter Diamandis that put this together along with Google. And it's taken 20 years to get the first 3 billion people online. So it's, we can take all this online stuff for granted now. If you're an online marketer, a digital marketer, but it's really just been in the past 20 years that this has happened. However, in the next 4 years, Google expects another 3 billion people to come online for the very first time. 3 billion. That's 3 billion people who will be buying, uploading, learning, creating, and selling online and marketing online that have never done so before. So if you thought the competition was tough now, in the next 4 years you're going to have your mind blown. And that's what goes back to when I showed you earlier, the World Economic Forum, that why creativity has gone right up there at number 3 is because it's going to be the thing that you can compete on, and it's in your wheelhouse anyway. So I'm going to talk to you now through some of these creativity hacks. I'm going to talk you through I'm going to do it in the process of what we call the classic 5 stages of the creative process. And if you've got a pen, I know we're going to be sharing these slides with people as well, but you may want to be making notes here as well. What I'm going to do is for this audience, just so you can really kind of ground it in maybe your experience as well, I'm going to talk to you in relation to a content marketing project that we did here at my business, which was the Creative Life podcast. So one of my goals was to share my expertise on creativity with as many people as possible through a podcast. So as those 3 billion people come online, start searching for ways to live more creative lives and build innovative companies, I wanted to be the person that they would find first. Now, if you're a content marketer, you will know that podcasts are a really powerful content marketing tool that you have available to you. So as I walk you through this and these 5 stages and these hacks, I want you to reflect and think about how you can apply it to what you do, whether that's your own content marketing agency, or if you're an individual, you're a solopreneur, how it can apply to you. So the very first stage in the creative process is what we call the preparation stage. Now, this is the stage as creatives where we basically absorb ourselves in all the research. It's where you kind of go and if you're a marketer, for example, if you're preparing you want to create something new, you will go and look at how maybe other people have done it in the past. So you will really learn as much as possible about this thing that you're trying to do. As I mentioned, I was speaking to a group of judges and lawyers the other day about creativity. And so for them, that's looking at the casework and just really digging into the case itself. So whatever kind of work you do, if you're a nonfiction author, it's maybe reading other nonfiction authors' work to get inspiration. If you're a fiction writer, it's maybe reading works by other great writers. If you're a musician, it's listening to back catalog to get inspired and get ideas from it as well. Whatever the thing is, you're in what we call the preparation stage. Now, a couple of things to note here when we come to the preparation stage. The place and the environment in which you're working can have a dramatic effect on your creative process. And what we've found is that different stages of the creative process work best in different types of environments. So one stage of the process, maybe this preparation stage, you will use one type of environment, and another stage, you will use another type of environment. So for example, with this first stage, which we call the preparation stage, studies have shown that they tend to work best in quiet environments, or those certainly with low-level background noise, like maybe a cafe, a cafe, but not too busy. Because what you're trying to focus on is absorbing as much information as possible. So if in this stage, this preparation stage, you want to make sure that you're in a place where you can just focus on absorbing the information. It's not necessarily about coming up with new ideas at this stage, it's about absorbing as much information as possible. Another thing to recognize at this point is that time and how you divide up your time is very important, and no more so than for people that are really doing the highest level of creative work. Because what I've tended to find is the people who are at the top of their tree creatively are also a little bit selfish. They're a little bit selfish of their time. They control their calendar very, very tightly. And when we talk about time, we have to distinguish between two types of time. We have what's called manager's time and creator's time. So manager's time is maybe what you're living in most of the time, which is, those 15-minute chunks, those 30-minute meetings, those 1-hour meetings. And that's fine, and you get a lot of stuff done, and that's the way that most managers are living their days and their weeks. But there's another type of time, which we call creator's time. And this is where you block out larger periods of time. Because what you're focused on there is not necessarily just getting something done all the time and being purely in execution mode, but you also need to have time which is slightly unstructured as well. Now, I've had the good fortune of doing some work with Karen Elazari, who's she formerly was a very top cyber hacker, and she now teaches, I think she's a professor at Tel Aviv University now on cyber hacking. And we were having this discussion. She said some of the best hackers in the world are the most creative hackers, because they don't think in that manager's time, they think in creator's time, and they think about how they block out these periods of time when they can really go deep on a particular project. Now, in your average week, you will have a mixture of these two different times, but it's important for you to block out periods in your calendar each week where you can go deep and you can go into that preparation stage. It's also critical that as you're starting to do this, you have tools or a tool to capture the ideas. So it doesn't matter whether it's digital or analog. In my case, I use Evernote. I use the tool on Evernote to be able to capture information all the time. I also use the voice notes on Evernote because it's a really easy way to capture voice ideas that you have. And I mix that with a Moleskine, a notebook. So whichever you have, just make sure that you always have it with you. So it's just very quick for you to capture those ideas. Another thing, which I'll talk about a little bit later, is this idea of morning pages. I won't get into too much at this stage, but the point of it at this stage, the preparation stage, is not necessarily to generate new ideas. It's really just to let your mind absorb as much information as possible and maybe just start noting a couple of things. So in the case of the podcast we were doing, we had to basically prepare the best way to launch and create and launch this podcast and manage this podcast. So one of my big issues, we were talking about time, was how do you kind of find the time to do these projects which require more in-depth thinking. And this is a friend of mine, Chris Ducker, put this together. This is a great thing. It's something I do every couple of months. And I suggest you do just now. You've got a piece of paper in front of you. Just put 3 lines down it, put in 3 columns, and in list 1, put the things that you don't like doing. List 2, the things that you can't do, and list 3 are the things that you shouldn't do. So when it came to doing the podcast, for example, there was a whole bunch of things I don't like doing. There's a whole bunch of things I can't do, and those are the things that you look to try and outsource first. So this is just a very simple exercise just now, because in order to make time for that deep creative work that you have to do, you probably have to try and get some other things off your plate first. And in the case of the podcast, just to let you know, we put an entire little team together. And in this preparation stage, each member of the team, so we had Karen, who was looking at inviting guests, and Mackie, who was on design, and Mark, who was video editing, and we had another member of the team as well. In this preparation stage, we all went to our respective corners and we went deep and we researched the best way of doing this podcast. So in that preparation stage, everyone kind of goes deep. The next stage, which is stage 2, is the incubation stage. So after we've done all the research, we need to let things percolate in our mind for a little while. A lot of people might think you're not doing any work, but actually what's kind of going on is you're just letting things percolate in the background. Now, recent studies on creativity have shown that at this incubation stage, it is often useful to work on another project for a while to allow your subconsciousness to do the heavy lifting, to change patterns. So in my case, with my team, I switched them to another project for 2 weeks. If you're working on a creative project and you're really down and you're doing the heavy duty preparation for it, give yourself a little period of time. It could be a week, a couple of days, a week, 2 weeks, just to switch and then come back to it. You will get a measurable number of benefits from doing that. So I mentioned about how color at the start affects creativity. And in the most innovative companies that I've seen, that I've worked with, you will notice everything from the layouts of the offices to the colors on their walls are carefully kind of calibrated to foster creative work environments. So I'll give you a couple of things now you can start to use in your own work environment. So the University of British Columbia has shown that if you want people to do better on work that requires attention to detail, you want to place the color red in the background, on the walls, in the furniture, soft furnishings, or even on the page, for example, as a website. However, if it's more creativity that you're after, then it's been found that having the color blue around you generates more ideas. Well, no surprise there. So, for example, you might have the color red more prominent in workspaces where people are working on jobs that require accuracy, while you'll have the color blue in those spaces where people will spend time thinking up or discussing new ideas. And there's just actually been a very much more recent study by University of Berlin. And what they've found is actually the color green, and when I say green, I mean a vibrant green, actually outperforms both red and blue for the generation of new ideas. I'm not talking about the quality of ideas, I'm just a number of ideas. So it's no wonder then we often get our best ideas when we're out walking in nature, because the dominant color will often be green. So if a very simple thing to have around you is in your creative workspace, have vibrant greens. It could be plants, it could be soft furnishings, it could be wall coloring. Have that green because it will have an effect on your creativity. Another quick hack I'm going to teach you just now is this actually one they teach, I think, at military school. It's called preloading. And so if you're working on your creative project and you're stuck on something, a good tip to do is before you go to bed at night, think deeply about what that question is in your head, and then just go to sleep thinking about the idea. And often when you will find in the morning, I'll explain why in a second, you will have a solution or solutions for that idea, and we call it preloading. It's a very common creativity hack that we use. The third stage in this creative process is what we call the insight stage. It's that classic aha or light bulb moment we've all experienced. So if you want to increase your likelihood of having insights, then they're most likely going to happen during low-level physical activity. Let me give you a couple of examples of that. One of the reasons we get so many of our good ideas happen in the morning when we're having our morning shower. By the way, that's not me in the picture. Note to self, I should probably go to the gym a little bit more often, but that's not me. Because what's happening here, and it goes back to what I said right at the start, is our mind is drowsy, it's unwound, it's disorganized, and we're open to unconventional ideas. I mentioned that idea of conventions and being unconventional. That time in the day, you are open to those unconventional ideas, because what's going on in the brain is that alpha waves are rippling through your brain. So we're more likely to direct our attention inward to remote associations emanating from the right hemisphere. That's kind of briefly what's kind of going on there as well. So that's why you get some of your best ideas often in the morning, your morning shower. Something else that you have to recognize is that it's actually very difficult at this stage to force insights. However, you can do a couple of things to increase the likelihood of them happening. So stimulants such as caffeine can actually be really useful at the preparation stage, that first stage, when you're cramming all that information in. Coffee, no problem, doesn't have a problem. And it can also be very useful at the last stage. But actually, having high levels of caffeine can be detrimental to having insights, this middle stage. So this is what Martha Farrar, who's the neuroscience professor at University of Pennsylvania, says. She says, you might be able to work for 8 hours straight on coffee, but you're probably not going to have many big insights. So quick tip here from a quick hack is when you're in that insight stage, when you're looking for insights, reduce the caffeine levels because you will have more likelihood of having those insights. So many of us work in teams. Another kind of quick one here, especially when it comes to insights, is brainstorming. It's fantastic, and we all love doing brainstorming sessions, and it's been around since the 1950s. However, most organizations get brainstorming sessions totally wrong, because I'm sure we've all experienced that thing of what we call the tyranny of the pen, when it's the person that holding the pen in the next to the whiteboard in the room, somehow their ideas dominate, and they dominate the room. So I'm going to give you a suggestion just now. Before any brainstorming session, your team should be told in advance what the problem is that they're looking to solve, what the brainstorming session is. That's especially the case if you are your members of your team who may be a little bit quieter, don't like speaking up as much. You need to give them time beforehand for them to work creatively on potential solutions to this problem. So when you come into the room, everyone should have a pen and pens, and they should have post-it notes. No one should dominate the board in that way. Another couple of things to say as well is there's lots of other great brainstorming techniques. One quick one for you here as well is what we call brain writing. So especially if you're working with engineers, I've worked at tech companies, we have lots of engineers who are not sometimes the most gregarious folks. So what we will do is we will do brain writing sessions where instead of it going up on the board, each person's given a sheet of paper, you write your 6 ideas, and it gets circulated, and the person next to you, to your right, then spends the next 5 minutes either adding to those ideas or adding their new ideas. So no one's speaking, and then the final ideas go up on the board as well. Just one very quick little kind of tip there, especially if you're working with folks who are a little bit kind of quieter. So with my own team, what we do is we have, a lot of my team are in different parts of the world, so I've got some of my team in the Philippines, and we have pizza parties where I organize pizzas for everyone in the Philippines, for all the team, and we use things like Slack to create our new ideas. But I use some of those same techniques in terms of giving people the things in advance, what the problem is or the challenge that we're trying to solve, and that's what we do on the call. So this fourth stage, and we're kind of coming up towards the end here as well, is where we can learn the most from some of the most creative companies out there. It's the evaluation stage. It's where all the ideas that you've been evaluating, you basically have to decide which ones are worth pursuing. And perhaps the best company I would say that encapsulates this idea is Pixar. So this is a company obviously that marries technology and art and generates billions of dollars in IP in the process. And the thing I want to get across to you just now as it relates to creativity is how they communicate with each other. So each morning, the teams at Pixar get together to evaluate the previous day's work. My team does exactly the same thing. How they give feedback at Pixar, or now Disney Pixar, is very, very important. And I want to give you this just now. You might want to write these down. So the first thing is to provide feedback at the right time. You can crush an idea very easily if you try and give feedback too quickly in the process. So you need to be selective about when you give your feedback. The other thing you have to do is to say what is wrong, missing, or unclear. So rather than just saying, oh, that scene doesn't work, it just doesn't work, you have to say, well, I think the scene doesn't have the pace of the previous scene because of X, Y, Z. So you need to have some clarity in your feedback. The other one is don't rush to provide a solution. So you may say, this is what I'm seeing here, or I'm hearing here, this is maybe the problem, but don't necessarily jump in. Even if you think you have the most amazing solution for it, don't immediately jump in with that solution. And once again, just the idea of being very, very specific with your feedback. So this is something that Pixar do, something we do, some of the most creative organizations in the world. These are the things that they're doing in order to keep that kind of creative culture within the organization. Then this fifth and final stage is what we call the elaboration stage. So this is what, as Edison said, success is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. All that previous stuff was the 1%. This elaboration is the 99% that's going on here as well. It's where we do the testing, the minimum viable products. It's the iteration of your initial ideas. In our case, with the podcast, what we do is we have this be everywhere idea. We just want to be everywhere. So when we create an episode, it goes out across all of our platforms. And I'm not going to take up too much time on this because as content marketers, you will be very, very familiar with this type of model as well. So we're not going to cover that final stage too much here. Now, we can look to finish up when we're going to get into Q&As. I want to give you a couple of ideas in terms of how you can kind of capitalize on this new creative age and really start to invest in your own kind of creativity training as well. So one thing I have to say is when we think about creativity and innovation, I would argue that it's actually a team sport. It's not necessarily an individual sport. And we talk about this idea of the lone creative genius. In reality, it takes a team to be able to do this. And whenever you go to see a concert, you will see that artist, that lone artist on the stage or the band on the stage, there will be 50 people behind them that make that happen, the backstage as we have it. And it's very difficult sometimes to not compare your back shop to someone else's front shop. So you can see what's up on the stage there. And you think, oh, it can never be like that. But you also have to remember there's a team going on here as well. So as a team, we're only as strong as our weakest players. So everyone, as a member of your team, they all have to ensure that they're in the best creative shape. They need to come to those meetings, whether it's brainstorming meetings or whatever meetings that you're having. They have to have that creatively being very strong and being very flexible of mind. So I'm going to give you a couple of takeaways that you can do just now to ensure kind of good creative health for yourself as well, both personally and professionally. If you're one of those people that doesn't identify as being creative, which I know is a minority, about 13%, then definitely go and start doing some online courses. We often talk about CPD, continual professional development. I would argue that we also need to do continuing creative development. So whether that's a free course on FutureLearn, Coursera, edX, there's some amazing courses there, especially when it comes to creativity. Do courses which don't directly relate to your job, because often some of the biggest innovations will come from ideas from another industry, another field that you apply to your field. You will see, oh, I see that, and I see how I can apply that to what I'm doing here as well. So there's some great courses. Take an online course. The next thing I mentioned towards the beginning was creativity is like a muscle, so it needs stretching and working out each day to stay on top form. One of the easiest ways to do this, and the most inexpensive ways to do this, is with what we call morning pages, where you sit down each morning, you write freehand for 15 minutes, and anything that's on your mind. These will never be read by anyone else. They're just for you, but they just allow you to, every morning, to exercise that creative part of you to get these ideas out on the page. So on the professional front, I'm not going to get too much into this as well, because I see we're getting a little bit close on time here as well. But I would also encourage you, create your own courses. It's a great way of learning by having to teach. So if you're skilled in your part of marketing, your content marketing, create your own course, whether it's through any of the many platforms like Udemy, and examples are out there. I know we have some people on here who maybe lecture at universities about marketing. See if they have a MOOC provider, a massive open online course provider, and offer to create a marketing course with them as well. All these things will help you keep fresh in terms of your ideas. And just as I kind of finish up just now, we're going to get to Q&As. If you're interested in this whole kind of creativity thing, if this is like something, okay, I need to invest in more, I've got a free book which everyone's going to, you can get just now. Just go to jamesdale.me/free, and you'll be able to download that as well. And it's got lots of really quick little hints. Some of the things I've covered in this, a lot of things I wasn't able to cover in this one. But hopefully what I've said today has served you. I'm extremely happy that so many of you do consider yourselves creative. That's awesome. And the 13% that are on here just now that don't currently consider themselves creative, I hope I've kind of pushed you a little bit towards making creativity part of who you are. So on that note, Byron, should we maybe come to some Q&As?
Yes, indeed. Oh, fantastic presentation, by the way. Inspirational. Really enjoyed it. Feel free to leave that last slide presentation up with the free link to it if you want while we're talking. So I had a couple hundred questions, but I'll myself. Somebody wanted to ask, there's some other questions pouring in, so I'm going to read a few. How may we expand and become better creatives and draw creative genius into our lives? A rather interesting question there from Marie. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Marie, for that question. So there's a number of different tools that you can do to do that. One of the things that the creative mind really values highly is novelty and variety. So you can do this in lots of ways. I find a great way of doing this is just through travel. It's kind of not going down the same path every day. It's like sometimes we get into this thing like a record, like a vinyl record. We get in the same groove, and it just kind of keeps going back into that groove every day, and we're not really going to be creating anything new. So a great way of doing this is just getting out into the world a little bit more in terms of travel. And that doesn't mean going abroad. It just maybe means going to the next town over or taking a different route to where you're going. So there's lots of very, very small little things that you can do because, as I mentioned before, this idea of creative genius, a lot of people, go back to Romans and Greeks, they believe that genius can often come from the place in which you were working, the place in which you were doing things. So a great way of maybe tapping into that genius is to experience new places and go and speak to new people, discover new places as well, get inspiration that way.
How about dress? I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but I'm a creative person. I tend to dress a little bit creatively. Yeah. What's the correlation there? Is there any?
No, there's not. I haven't seen any kind of studies in terms of direct correlation in terms of what they wear. I wouldn't be surprised if there is some correlation because of what I mentioned about being conventional in things as well. However, if you look at let's say we talk about marketing, for example, some of the most creative minds, if we think of great copywriters, David Ogilvy. Well, David Ogilvy wore a suit. and his famous, glasses that he wore every day, he wasn't dressed like a, hippie or anything. So, I would say it's one of the smallest parts of it in terms of what you exhibit outside. I will say that your vibe attracts your tribe. And so often when you will dress in a certain way and be in a certain way in the world, it will attract people to you that will maybe help you generate new ideas.
By the way, amazing quote and or tweet there. Your vibe attracts your tribe. Thank you for that.
I'm not sure if it's one of I don't know who said it originally, but it is a great one.
It seems like maybe it's a Seth Godin thing. I think you wrote a book on tribes. Here's a question. What do you suggest if you're a company of one in terms of creativity with a team?
So in terms of if you have, you're on your own, but you don't have a team?
Solo practitioner. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so if you're a solo practitioner, in some ways it's easier, in other ways it's more difficult. What I often find with the solo practitioners is that they're very good at the initial stages of the creative process. The bit that they struggle with is the fourth and the fifth stage, the evaluation. So especially if you're a very creative individual, you will have no lack of ideas. That's not your biggest challenge. The challenge that you have is to evaluate those ideas and decide which ones to pursue. And there's lots of different frameworks out there. If you go to my site at jamestaylor.me, I teach a thing that Warren Buffett bizarrely teaches around that stage of the creative process. And then the fifth stage, this elaboration idea, I would say as an individual creative, I think you can go much faster, but as a part of a team, you will go much farther. So I think there's nothing wrong with either way. I think you just have to find out what you're doing. And as a creative, you should definitely be looking to take chunks out of in your calendar where you do go away and get inspiration from other people, maybe in conferences. I know you've got the conference coming up in Boston soon as well, because that's just a great way of just getting the juices going, because it can become a little bit insular and you end up, it's like I used to live in Napa, in the wine area, Napa Valley, and there's a danger for people that work in wineries there that if they drink their own brand of wine for too long, the taste goes, the palate goes, because they're not exposing themselves to enough other wines. So you need to kind of get out into the world, even if you're just a solopreneur.
Very interesting. Is there a demand for creative content in your mind? Are readers demanding creativity in content? We've seen an upsurge with publications like The Hustle, for example. I'm not sure if you've ever read that email publication. Fantastic writing, originating from funny writing, literally. Do you think the audience, the world, if you will, is demanding more creativity in content creation and in artwork and design?
Yeah, I mean, I think because you've got a lot of, I know Peter Diamandis talks a lot about this as well, where you've got things like 3D printing, robots, they're changing stuff. So in terms of the manufacturing bit, it's going to be very difficult to compete on that. And I know that I'm after this, later next week, I head out to Asia. There's a huge interest in learning about creativity there, because their education systems were kind of more traditional education system, teaching by rote, and now in places like Singapore, in Shanghai, they recognize that they cannot compete on being the lowest cost provider. They have to compete on their ideas, and they're doing it globally as well. So I definitely think we're seeing a trend. If you look at if you look at Google Trends, you'll see that an uptick in creativity as well just now. Things like World Economic Forum, they're talking a lot more about it. I kind of see what's going on at the moment is a little bit similar to what happened in mindfulness around 5 years ago, where previously no one really talked about meditation or mindfulness, and then suddenly all these hedge fund managers came out saying that they were meditating 15 minutes every day. And I see a similar thing happening with creativity. Although a lot of big businesses will not use the word creativity, they'll use the word innovation instead. And that's just a little bit of a hangover.
What's your take on creativity burnout? Is it an actual thing that people can experience, and how do you prevent it?
Yeah, it's definitely a thing. Burnout, blocks, and I have a course at C School. We just teach just about that, different ways to kind of deal with that as well. I think having a daily practice, and especially like morning pages, is a good way of just limbering up every day. especially I would say if you're doing the same repetitive type of work on deadline the whole time, I think it's very easy to get burnt out. So you need to put in place things, often finding maybe other creative interests outside of your core talent. So for example, if you're a copywriter and you're just constantly having to be a really good copywriter all the time, maybe you need to spend a little bit of time learning about some other part of marketing, just to start balancing up a little bit what you're doing and keeping things fresh from you, because there's so many wonderful ideas out there as well. You kind of want to bring in some of the best to what you're doing, and your clients will only want to hire you, time and time again, if you can continually bring that to the party.
Here's a good question. What if putting out fires creatively keeps prioritizing over you getting back to your own core creativity? How do you reset and get back to your creative basics?
That's great. That's a great question. I don't know who sent that one in. So
Marie.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. It's the classic important v urgent, isn't it? We have the bright red thing that we have to take care of, but it's often not the most. I think it depends in the kind of organization you're in. I know as a manager, when I've worked with members of my team, if I've sensed that they're constantly firefighting and they're constantly in reaction mode all the time, we kind of have to look at how they're allocating their tasks and how they're doing things, and maybe readjust a little bit as well. I think a lot of it begins with the relationship that you have with your person that you're reporting to as well. It's definitely firefighting is fine for short bursts, and you have to do that. But in terms of keeping creatively on top of your game, it's not a long-term strategy. So you have to figure out ways, strategies to be able to maybe put things in your time, maybe put certain boundaries up, and it may be difficult for people you work with sometimes to deal with some of those boundaries. But if they really want to get the best from you, then you need to be fresh.
How does the mind establish a boundary for creativity? Let me explain that a little bit more. This is a question for me, so I'll expand upon the complexity of this question. Thanks. So, for example, I subscribe to Communication Arts Magazine, and I just live for its delivery to me so I can pound my way through and look for inspiration and ideas and have it perhaps have an impact on some other projects I'm doing. I set the bar high, if you will, with my expectations for design. And I'm not a designer, but I work with designers, and so I set that expectation high, and I want the creativity to be pushed to the max, hence the rebranding of our main site, WriterAccess, right? So a lot of thought went into it and high expectations, and let's do something innovative and different, something fresh, something no one's ever seen before, something new, all the fun things. Hard to produce, right? Worked with a great creative director on that. But I set a standard. Do we do that as creative people? Do we have an expectation for what is creative in our own mind, and what influences that?
Yeah, that's a great one, because I think the person that spoke most eloquently about this is Ira Glass from This American Life. He has if you go online, it's there somewhere, and he talks about this idea where when you get started, your taste is good. You have good taste. You know what you want, and it's higher. And every single day that you go into work, it's never quite as good as where your taste wants it to be. And every single day, you have to work on it. And unfortunately, there's no shortcut for it. It's just every day getting better. It's investing in your craft in order that the artistry of what you do. And I do believe in whatever work, there's an artistry, and if you get good at what you do, that's there as well. So I think that should be rewarded. The fact that you are bringing in ideas from maybe it's some left field from a design perspective. I mean, I love the fact you've got on for the conference just now, all the guests have more illustration type images with that green wash that's on it. And for me, that for many people that might be a small thing, but for me it just shows there's an attention to detail there, and there's a care that's going on as well. So I think messaging, it's very subtle actually. When you get to that level, it's very subtle, but don't be worried, because every day you are going to feel like what you're doing is not good enough, but it's your standards. You should just focus on your standards, and every day just trying to get closer and closer to where your taste wants you to go.
Do you know writers that have never had writer's block or the feeling of being creatively stuck?
Yeah, I know writers that do that.
Thank you for that, because I believe they're out there. I mean, I've never been at a loss for what to talk about or something creative to write about. Like I can find inspiration just about anywhere, and I just didn't know. Either I'm not producing really good work, therefore it doesn't require this wonderful sense of creativity that has to overwhelm you, which is very possible, or I don't know. Maybe some people just have idea after idea after idea, and maybe there are people that can't decipher the best ideas from the worst ideas, but they have a lot of ideas. Maybe there's more to the genius than just having an abundance of ideas. I guess that's my point. Yeah,
and I think that's the thing with the creative process is that the ideation stage or the insights. That's just one stage. You still have to go and sit and say, oh, okay, I've got these 100 ideas today. Which ones do I want to pursue? And that requires grit and requires discipline to be able to do that. And it's often where a team can be very useful and just kind of call you out sometimes, saying, actually, you think that's we don't think that's going to work as well. And that's why I talk about feedback at the same time, where you have to be open and honest with that feedback. But no, I think it's writer's block. I know people that get it. I know people that have never had it before. So there's no one rule to go there. If you are suffering from creative block, I know that it's a thing as well, and we teach a couple of strategies around that at C School. But one of the simplest ways is write about your creative block. Or write about what makes you angry. Yeah. Anger is or fear. These are go to your emotional side, because sometimes you're just a little bit too much in your head and not enough in your gut and your heart when you're writing.
Yeah. Oh, great question here. I work in healthcare content marketing, and often face pushback from clinicians and staff about venturing into the creative communication methodology. How do you convince those about the power of creativity in your communication and commonly dry subject areas?
Yeah, so that's a big question. It's a big area.
Yeah, I have an answer. I have a really crisp answer for that. Ready? Find another company or industry.
Well, you do find, and that's part. The vibe attracts your tribe, and so you will find it's not unusual why so many creatives will go maybe to a different type of company for a while, and those other companies that are slower to adapt will have challenges there. There is good work around in terms of personality types, because I also believe that, especially if you've done any kind of Myers-Briggs type work or any kind of personality stuff with your team as a whole, you should all kind of know of your team which personality types everyone has, because depending on their personality types is how they want to be communicated to. So you have to value that person for where they are. You can't change that's where they are. So, for example, where you might find kickback is maybe from, I think what people at Edward de Bono would call the black hats. So the people who are very numbers focused and things. So for there, you have to tweak your messaging to them and show them data. You have to show them why this is going to work. So you need to know your team. You need to know whose mind you're trying to change.
Very good. Well, we've run a little bit over time here. Really want to thank you for being on with us today.
Well, it's been my pleasure. It's been great speaking. And thank you, everyone, for coming on, spending some time here today with us, and for all your great questions. I wish we could have had more time. We could have kept on going with some of these amazing questions.
Well, perhaps we'll jump on a podcast with you again, I guess. I think we've done one with you already, but we need another podcast with you to dive deeper into this topic, so we'll try to see if we can make that happen. Best of luck. 2 final questions. Who would you want to get a hold of you, just for curiosity, or are your free books and your communication and your courseware the best way to really track along with you and learn?
Yeah, so just go to jamestaylor.me, obviously /free, and you'll get that free book. And then I'll send you, information about other things we've got around the C School and the courses there. You can follow me on Twitter at @JamesTaylor_me. And but jamestaylor.me, that's my kind of home online. So you just head over there.
Terrific. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you next month. Thanks again, James.
Pleasure. Great being on here.
Look forward to the next with you, wherever it is, whatever country it's in or conference, hopefully. We'll get you at CMC, hopefully, in 2018. We'll look forward to that.
That'd be great. Have a great conference. Take care.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.